Welcome back to another episode of Psychocinematic. I'm happy to be back because I've been gone for the last few weeks because my wife just gave birth to our son. And so just been taking care of him and being homebodies for the most part. But I've got a super exciting guest on today and one I couldn't be more stoked on. And he is the director of photography for the one and only Barbarian. His name is Zach Kuperstein. Well, Zach, thank you for being here and taking the time to talk to me about Barbarian. It's probably one of my favorite horror movies that, I've seen in recent years. Probably one of my top three of 2022 when, saw it in theaters. And I don't think I've ever come across a movie that has gotten that kind of reaction from me at about the 44-minute mark with that one really shocking scene. And I mean, it's me and my wife in the theater. And I mean, our faces must have been priceless. And then I sent you a video of my newborn son who just happened to cry. I don't think he actually saw it, but had to do some podcast prep with him.
What did you think about that? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he probably can't see more than 6 inches in front of him.
Yeah, exactly. But the sound itself is a little frightening. Just wanted to give you guys your flowers because the movie's great. And anything about like an Airbnb and horror is just right up my alley.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here and talking with you about the film. And yeah, I'm so glad it affected you.
So I had prefaced this that you were the director of photography. So anytime we say DP, that's what we're referring to for anyone who doesn't know. But could you get into a little bit of your background, basically how you got into all of this and, maybe how long you've been doing it, those kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, this prompts me to ask you another question. Just who's your audience for this? To what level of like film worlds are the people who watch this?
We have aspiring filmmakers or just overall movie fans. I just had recently gotten a comment from someone who is asking for me to have people explain the more technical things. And it was during one of, it was like an animation podcast. And, I probably should have asked for them to specify what that means. Cause it's like, if I know it doesn't mean that everyone knows it. So
cool. Well, I'm pretty good at keeping things pretty accessible, but stop me if you need further explanation or anything. Anyway, to answer your question, where do I come from? I grew up in Massachusetts, the suburbs of Boston, and I got into film through picking up my dad's camcorder when I was a kid. I was pretty blown away by just the ability to make moving images. And I've always kind of loved problem solving, things in motion, and doing things with my hands. I kind of consider myself a maker. When I realized, I can make videos, that was really exciting. I had some friends who were getting into skateboarding and I was terrible at skateboarding. So I could film them skating and make skate videos and still be friends with them, which was great. And when I put all that footage into iMovie and added music to it, it blew my mind. I was like, whoa, I can edit things and tell a story and add music and sound effects and cool transitions and everything. It just what an amazing amalgam of things to put together. So that kind of set me off in that direction. But at the time, I also had a lot of other interests. I was a tap dancer and I was interested in magic, which in retrospect kind of makes sense as a cinematographer, like the movie magic of it all. And the thing that interested me about that was the tricks behind the scenes, like knowing how it all worked and the illusion that a magician was able to pull off. So I was kind of trying to figure out what of these things do I want to do for a career, do in my life, and make the one main thing. I was also into woodworking, which I still am now, and that piqued my interest a lot. But I think what I realized about film is that it's so collaborative and it's so amazing to be around other people who are in the same world and who care as much about the thing as I do. And when I finally met a group of those people through doing a summer high school program at New York Film Academy in the Boston area, I realized, these are my people. This is the type of people, this is the crowd that I want to be around. And this is the thing I want to be doing 24/7. So at that point I was like, okay, I'm going to film school, going to do this thing hardcore. And then it was a question of, well, which film school and what role do I want to have in film? So I went to NYU and thought I wanted to be a director. And that kind of came, I think, from my dad mostly. He was sort of type A personality, entrepreneur, inventor, scientist, artist, really a visionary type person. And when I set out to film school, I got the impression that I needed to be like the number one in charge and the leader and like the creative visionary. And I just realized pretty quickly that's not exactly who I am. I think I'm more the type of person who can take somebody else's vision and try to improve on it and help execute their vision. And like I said, I'm a maker, and doing things with my hands is more satisfying. So when I realized, oh, I could do cinematography, which is visual storytelling, which is probably my favorite part of filmmaking, and also be collaborative with crew members, with directors, and help other people's visions come to life and see those on screen and help execute that vision, problem solving on the way. All those things are things that I was like, yes, this is the thing for me. So gave up directing. I was like, I'm going to be a DP, and fell in love with it. So did a lot of crew work, was a camera assistant, gaffer, key grip, all for a while working that way and working as a DP on smaller projects. And then back in 2014, the end of the year, I gave that up and I was like, I'm just a DP now. And that was probably not the best financial decision, but it was a great career decision. So been solely a DP since then, and having a good run at it. So that's the story.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's all really cool. And you said a few things I want to touch on. So it's funny that you said, picking up your dad's camcorder and then making skate videos, because I was the same way. We had a camcorder, we're actually recording on tape. You would have to like tape over it if the tape fills up. And I was not very good at skateboarding. I basically could ride, but my brother and friends were all really good. And so but I never edited them.
Right.
And so it's funny that you had a similar origin in that sense. And film school, it's really cool that you were able to notice early on that you weren't the director type and that you would rather bring the vision, someone else's vision to life. So that's super cool.
There was a moment in a freshman year class, and this wasn't exactly the turning point for me, but it was a class where they said, okay, you've come to film school, you're all storytellers, like write a story, like a 1 or 2 page story from your growing up that you want to tell in a film or something like that. Maybe it was like a hardship that you faced or something to that effect. And I was like, wow, I grew up pretty privileged and pretty grateful that I had no hardships. The hardship is that I don't have a story to tell, and I'm here with trying to tell a story, but maybe that's not who I am and not where I fit into this. So that assignment kind of tipped me off to maybe this isn't the right thing for me.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. You're like leaning over to the kind of fucked up person next to you, like, oh, what happened to you? I'm making that story. It's too bad they didn't allow you to just like come up with something, but I guess it's good because then you really found out what you wanted to do. But I like that you talked about the magician stuff, because it really is like so much magic behind making any kind of film. And a lot of the questions I have for you are trying to find out what's going on behind the scenes, like how you guys accomplish these things. So I'm hoping that the magician's going to share the secrets, because I know some people don't like to talk about all that stuff.
But. Yeah, no, and that's the problem with magicians. Actually, I was so frustrated by I want to know how you did the trick, and what's the problem? Like, it doesn't take away from it for me to know how it was done. So now, as the so-called magician, I love to share my secrets, and I don't believe in like a secret sauce or anything. It's really just cool to hear how other people do things. So
awesome. Yeah, it just gives me more appreciation for all the work that goes into it. So with that, I wanted to know, on top of your portfolio that you had comprised by the time that you got this job doing Barbarian, was there anything else that helped you land the gig as director of photography?
Well, mostly the producers that I had worked with before. The team from Boulder Light, I'd worked with them on a movie called The Vigil, and we really hit it off. I loved working with the director on that film, Keith Thomas. But the producers, I think I earned their trust with that film, and a lot of that was through Keith and I's prep process. And it's a prep process that I've been honing for many films, many years. I think they felt good about recommending me to Zach Kreger because of that. Then when I met Zach, I think, he and I just hit it off really quickly. I kind of got lucky that he didn't judge me too hard on being late to the meeting, which I am never late to things, but it was like mid-pandemic. Somehow it like skipped my mind that we were going to have this interview, and I was out walking the dog, and he emailed me like, "Hey, hope you're coming to the Zoom thing." I was like, "Oh no." I just sprinted inside, and I was like out of breath. And I remember I was wearing a Doors t-shirt, and he kind of made fun of me about that. Somehow, he got past that, and I think he maybe just saw that I was like in it for the right reasons. And I don't know, I saw that he had a clear vision and was so amped to express that. And I really liked his ability to call up on every film he's ever seen, which is thousands of films, and apply them to the project at hand, and have some kind of outlandish ideas. And the script was really attractive to me as well because of the twists and turns in the film.
You mentioned this planning process that you have cultivated, and I want to come back to that because a handful of my questions are about the planning that goes along with that. But before I do, I want to know more about your role as DP on the film, because something that I've come to learn since doing this podcast is that every director seems to like things to be handled in their own way. So if you're a storyboard artist, some people want the storyboard artist, or some directors want the artist there on set, and having a pretty involved role. Other people just want you to make sure you're not losing the storyboard. Like it's just there. And so I'm kind of wondering what your exact role as DP was on the film.
Yeah. So I guess for the broader audience, the director of photography is kind of the creative right hand to the director. And it's mostly a collaboration on what the film's going to look and feel like. And most of the camera decisions related to the blocking, the camera positioning, and the lensing are crossover collaboration between the director and the DP. And sometimes that collaboration can lead them a little more heavily in one camp or the other. And some, yes, like you said, some directors prefer to work a certain way and have more control over things, or trust more, or whatever that is. But on Barbarian specifically, I feel like Zach and I had a really equal share in designing the shot list and designing the blocking for everything. And I owe that a lot to his willingness to be challenged and to challenge me, and to have a productive debate in our prep process, where the best idea would always win, truly. And people say that a lot, but I think he really meant it, and I could kind of tell that. And it felt good to really be challenged, where like I would have an idea and he'd be like, "Well, why is that the right idea?" And then I'd have to justify that. Or he would have an idea and I would be like, "I don't know, maybe there's a different way." And he would be like, "Okay, well, what is the different way?" And that was kind of a great way to go about that. As a director of photography on this film, it was really that 50-50 kind of collaboration and design with the camera. And then for usually the director of photography is in charge of the lighting as well, and kind of the look and feel, but it's still under the supervision of the director. So often Zach would have a lighting note, and it would mostly be like, "Hey, I'd love to see a little bit more detail there," or a little less detail there, or something like that. But the kind of vision of the lighting was kind of mostly my design, and that's typically how that breaks down in terms of a collaboration.
Gotcha. So for the lighting specifically, when you have an idea of where you want the lights, then you're telling the gaffer what you want and then they make it happen. Does that sound about right?
It's not so dictatorial as that. I think it's always a collaboration in that direction as well. So it's for me, I also tend to work equally with the gaffer and the key grip. I guess in Bulgaria, their system's a little bit different than the American system, but typically I find that kind of trifecta of DP, gaffer, key grip to be a great way to approach the lighting design. And it's going to come from a place of like, well, I have an idea about generally what I want it to look like, where the light should be coming from, what the tone of the scene is. And those are the things that I'll usually run by the director. Say, "Hey, I think this is probably going to be like a darker scene. It feels like there wouldn't be any practical lights on in this scene, so it's all lights going to come from the windows, or it's just going to be the flashlight." And if it's a more critical thing that's kind of determining like the overall look and feel of a moment, I might do some tests and or bring some references and say, do you like this or this? And that would give me a little bit more of a direction to go with things. And also help me identify what I like. Once I've kind of established, like, hey, I think this is the look and feel we're going to go with, like the flashlight stuff in the tunnels in Barbarian. It was, how do we execute that? And I usually leave it as an open question for we, not so much like a this is the light you're going to use. And I find that brings the best creative energy and best involvement, and everybody's excited about solving the thing. And often those are solutions that I bring, and often there are solutions that a gaffer or a key grip can bring to the table as well, just on what's the best way to execute it. And especially in a foreign country, when I don't know their system that well, and I also don't know what lights we will or won't have access to, or what kind of rigs or ways of doing things are the best way for them to do it. That's where I lean more on their expertise and experience and local knowledge to be able to execute those things. But having that outsider perspective can also lend like well, this is a way that maybe you guys haven't done it before, and this would be a cool thing to try, and then we can all learn from each other. So it's pretty back and forth in that way.
So there's a lot of collaboration there. So that's cool, and it keeps everyone excited and feeling like they have some creative input. And again, that the best idea is going to win out. Exactly. You said Bulgaria. Didn't know it was shot in Bulgaria.
Didn't know that.
No clue.
Oh, okay.
I was like, wait, what? Okay, so that that I guess that totally makes sense. Because I mean, it's set in Detroit, and I'm just like, I don't know if this is a Detroit street or if this is like a sound stage, if it's a real street. Not sure where all that is taking place, but that's cool to know that it's in Bulgaria, and the systems would be different. So does that mean that basically you and Zach were the main Americans that came over for this shoot, and then you guys hired in Bulgaria?
Yeah, the only Americans were me, Zach, the producers, and the actors. And some of the actors were British, but the rest of the crew were all local to Bulgaria. And just to kind of give you the secret behind the magic, I guess, all of the interiors, especially the house, were built on a stage. The exterior of the main street there was built from scratch in a field. There was like a road running through the field, and otherwise all of the structures, except for the silo, were built as facades, and the silo happened to be there. And originally in the script, it was a church, but through some discussion with Zach, we changed it to the silo, and there's a bit of a story there, but I'll save that for a bit. Okay. And then we did shoot 2 days in Detroit about a month and a half later. And those were just some moments to extend the scenes where Georgina's character is driving through the Detroit neighborhoods or walking through the neighborhoods. But all the other locations, and then there's like one shot in downtown Detroit, but the moment where she had the job interview and the gas station, a couple of the other locations that aren't directly in the house, those were all in Bulgaria. And then the other exception would be the Malibu driving down the Pacific Coast Highway with Justin. That was done actually in Malibu.
So when it goes back to like the 80s or whenever that was set, is that the same house, or did you guys build completely like identical homes to make them look different? Because like the neighboring homes are completely trashed, like in present day. So is that the same?
Yeah, so it's the same street, and the facades were rebuilt and painted, and we paved the street to kind of clean it up as well, and painted the silo as well. So a lot of that for that flashback moment, that was a huge consideration of where can we build it, where can we have the effect on the that we want to on the entire neighborhood, and one of the reasons that we went to Bulgaria to begin with, because if we were to do this in Detroit, it would mean somehow taking ownership of the whole block in a real neighborhood. And that seemed kind of unrealistic, not just for this like transition moment, but logistically it proved to be too expensive and challenging.
Right.
But yeah, those houses, they were constructed originally as trashed and then rebuilt for the flashback. And we had to schedule, I think it was about a week or a week and a half between our last shots there during present day to our first shots there in the 1980s, which were at the very end of the shoot. just to make sure that the art department had enough time to change things over.
Yeah, so then you have to like really make sure that you guys are done with the present day stuff
Yes,
before you
there
go
was.
and fix up the street.
Yeah, there was definitely a moment of like, are we sure? Are we sure? Sure. Okay,
Yeah.
let's go.
God, that's scary. So the tunnels, is that all sound stage? The rocks like foam or something like
Yeah,
that?
you nailed it. Yeah, the rocks
Okay.
are all foam, and that was all done on a soundstage. And
Wow.
the tunnels, the basement, the first floor of the house, all everything that's within the house itself was actually a single stage. And part of the challenge was laying out on that single stage where the set pieces would all fit because they all had to fit simultaneously for our schedule. The tunnels are made of carved foam, styrofoam blocks, and there was like a week or so where day and night there were sculptors there hacking away at the foam to try to make it have the right shape, and then painters came in and added all that texture and the kind of glisten to
Wow.
it. It was a pretty astounding build to see happen, and I have a great series of photos of the progress over time
I would
because
love
we
to
would
see that.
visit that set every day or so during prep. We were like, okay, we have to go see what's going on, check in, make sure things are looking good.
So that the interior, that all is connected actually, like they're not like stitched together in post.
They are stitched together. I wouldn't say like
Okay.
stitched in the way that you mean by in post, but they
Yeah.
are geographically stitched together in that each level is separate. So
Okay.
you can kind of think of the junction between the levels as like the end point of each one. The door to the base, and there's a little bit of overlaps that we could shoot in both directions at each of those moments. When you're in the first floor of the house, the door to like the basement landing, that little basement landing area was constructed at the same level as the house, but then it was reconstructed up from the actual basement. So we could sit at the bottom of the basement stairs and look up at that landing, or we could sit in like the laundry room and look into the landing, and it would look the same. But we couldn't ever look in the hall and around the corner down the stairs. That had to be those were separate shots. And then
Gotcha.
the other connection was from, so the basement itself then led for real into that kind of like secret hallway that's revealed with the door. And
Mhm.
then that led to the end of that was the door to the top of the long stairs. And then we could shoot back into the basement at that door. But if we wanted to look down the stairs, we would then go to a different set where that was at the top of the stairs, and the stairs were then built up from ground level. So you could look down the stairs and up the stairs from the bottom, and then that led into the main tunnel area, and then the last level was the pit itself. So there's kind of like the runoff into the pit. That was one level, and then that joined the top of the pit, which was built. The bottom of that was at ground level as well. So there's kind of four levels and then four junctions between those. And then even the connection between the front door of the house and the exterior had to be kind of had to have some overlap. So like I said, they were all facades that were built on location, but the hero house had a little bit more depth to it so that we could look into it a little bit from outside, and it would kind of
Mhm.
feel like the living room set. And I think we even had like a couple pieces of the furniture moved between the two spaces to feel that.
Wow.
Um, but the dimensions were all very different in there, so it was just enough to capture that. And even
Yeah.
the basement window too. Actually, that's another connector
Wow.
spot. That like little window where she's looking through. We
Yeah.
had to dig a hole in the ground for her to stand in, just for that, and for when the monster reaches out of the
That's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of like hurdles for your mind to go through to each of those transition points basically has just a little bit of the other set kind of remade there, but
Yep,
it's just kind of like a dead end. That's
exactly.
cool. Yeah, that's really neat to hear because yeah, I was wondering. I'm like, there's no way they actually built this under a house or that it exists under a house, but no, it's cool hearing the magic behind that. So when it comes to the blocking and the light tests, how long do you have to go into that set, figure out which like lighting setup you want to do, where you want the actors to be standing before you actually shoot that scene?
Those are kind of two totally separate things in my mind, and not everybody
Hmm.
treats them that way. But The blocking for us and my usual process is something that's developed through most of prep. So we had in this case 5 weeks of prep, and that was all in Bulgaria. And most of that time was Zach and I working on the shot list and designing the blocking while kind of supervising the set construction back and forth between that. And there was some location scouting as well. So back and forth between those meetings and seeing all those things, and then back at the hotel room or the production office working on the shot list. So once we had designed all the blocking together, and then we decided to do photo boards, and I've done photo boards on every feature that I've shot, and found that to be kind of really additive to the process, where it gets us even more on the same page, and where we can actually be looking at exactly what the shot's going to be, and we do that with stand-ins, and in our case, it was with Toshko, our AD. He came around, which was amazing, because then he could kind of see what we're thinking and participate in that, and just to have a body to be in things. And Toshko is great. He's just a lot of fun to have around. But we photoboarded the entire film, except for a couple of shots in the tunnels that it was just too dark when we were shooting them. And we were like, we get the idea. It's back and forth. And then in terms of the lighting, that was a pretty short conversation. With me and the gaffer and the key grip. A lot of it was we just had a tech scout. I think it was like maybe a 2-day tech scout, one just to look at the stage and one to look at the locations, or maybe it was 1 day, I don't remember. And during that, we're like, okay, here's like the kind of big picture lighting setup. And then I kind of let them know the types of lights that I like to have around, and my general like thought process and approach to lighting things. But we definitely didn't have time to plan lighting for every single shot or scene. And it was really just like, okay, here's like the types of general setups, and here's what we can pre-rig. Since we had that studio for the duration, it was like, we're going to put all these HMIs out the windows to create daylight when we wanted it, and have them be bounced at each window. And then here's the different methods that we can use to diffuse it in different moments. And then we're going to have light mats to walk around on set. And then also discussion of where the practical lights are going to go. For those who are the uninitiated, practicals are just lamps that are part of the set, but that's all part of the lighting design as well. So that was a discussion between me and the set decorator, and figuring out which practicals, where do they go, and then with the gaffer, how are those going to be wired so that we can easily control them with DMX, which is a digital control of lights and dimmers.
And you're using like special film bulbs in those practical lights?
No, actually, I prefer incandescent bulbs whenever
Okay.
possible for those things. They just have an interesting way of dimming that looks nice. And I also like incandescent bulbs in my home
Yeah.
for that reason. They're also really automatically high color rendering abilities, and they just work, whereas LEDs sometimes can get finicky.
So you as DP are also working with the set dresser, set designer, but are you also working with the wardrobe people to make sure that you're getting good colors on your actors?
Yeah, absolutely. I work with the costume designer to mostly just kind of like not approve, because it's not really like my place to give approval, but just like look at something and be like, is that going to work, or is that going to be a problem for camera? And usually that comes into play if like fabric is too light or too dark, or has like a really fine texture on it. Otherwise, I might just give my like general opinion, but I'm really not good at fashion, so I don't really.
Yeah. On the topic of the set design, I notice, in movies, it's often like everything's intentional with the colors that are on camera. And I'm curious how intentional the parking garage scene is when AJ's going to get his rental car, and like, cause the walls are like orange and there's like blue pillars. Is that all you guys location scout intentionally for something that looked like that?
I don't know if we had specifically that in mind, but we definitely looked at 4 or 5 different parking garages. And when looking at locations in for any film at any moment, you're weighing all of the pros and cons and trying to figure out, is this a color issue or is this a color bonus? Is this going to work for the blocking that we want to do? Do we like being able to see the different directions? And then to what extent can we manipulate the location through set decorating or painting? In that example, we didn't actually paint it at all, but To that extent, I don't think we were thinking that hard about the colors, honestly. I feel like most of the reasons that we picked that parking garage had to do with the layout of the cars and like the feeling of sort of a lot of depth of cars.
Hmm.
And I think there was another one that we were like considering, but you could kind of see a lot of daylight from the parking garage entrance, and we were concerned about time of day being in question at all. So we are like, let's just have it be totally underground, so we don't have to worry about time of day. And then I think there's also scheduling concerns of like, where is this location? Is it in close proximity to another location that we're going to be using? And you have to kind of balance all of those things. So
Right.
color was probably the last of our concerns in that case, but lighting was a big concern. And I remember that we definitely wanted something that had a sort of uniformity to the lighting and felt a little bit cool. And we didn't have the time or resources to change any of the bulbs in that space. So it was like, what's a space that we can lean into and know that it's going to look a certain way and look that way naturally.
Something that I was wondering too, because there is a lot of low key lighting when they're in the house, and I mean, I guess the tunnel too. There's How do you make sure that you're not screwing yourself over by it being too dark?
Great question. I guess like you have various exposure tools. There's a tool called false color that I employ regularly that allows you to see an overlay on the image of where the tonal values are falling in the exposure curve. So you can see when things are have no detail in them. They usually show up purple, and there's sort of like a skin tone represented by pink in there. There's green is neutral gray, and then you can see like yellow and red for very bright and blown out. So using that just to kind of eyeball or gut check and be like, am I doing all right? Is a good thing. And the other kind of but for the most part, I light by eye or light by the monitor and don't think too hard about it. And the kind of one way to help that, especially in the way of underexposure, is to have a LUT that is sort of taking down the brightness of the image, forcing me to open up the exposure a little bit, knowing that then I'll have a little bit more detail in post because it's a little bit easier to recover detail if you just got more exposure. So that was super helpful. And I worked with my colorist, Sam Daly, to develop the LUT for Barbarian. And I don't know if he explicitly did this or if we talked about it, but I've done a number of films with him and a few before this where we didn't really get an opportunity to design a LUT. And I often brought him pretty underexposed footage, and he did a great job of, getting what he could out of it. But I'm guessing that to combat that a little bit, he gave me a LUT that takes it down a notch so that would give him later a little bit more detail. I did find that in terms of like real darkness, one of the only scenes that was an issue was the kind of nightmare scene, or where she like wakes up and sees Bill Skarsgård's character writhing on the sofa out through the door. That was tough because it's light this scene so you can see it, but there's no lights on, and I really don't like moonlight as a lighting effect. It feels very unnatural. And there were some references that Zach showed me of some horror films that use that moonlight pretty aggressively, and he was like, I really don't want to do this. So he and I equally have a distaste for that. So how do you then light the scene? Like, this is in the script. How do I deal with this scene? And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this like really low level ambience and try to just like shape it and feel like it's sort of like when you wake up in the middle of the night and there's no lights on, you can see things, but like you can't really tell where the light is coming from. And I think that's just because it's so diffused usually that it's like, or it's coming from like the bounce off of like a light down the hall, and it's just like bouncing onto your white ceiling, and you just get the tiniest bit of exposure that way. So that was the approach for that scene. But it was also then I didn't want to underexpose it. So that one in particular, I overexposed. We like lit it at one stop and then pulled the ND, or maybe, I don't know what trick I did to trick ourselves, but we were like, this is the way we want it to look. Now let's just open up a stop because we're not at risk of losing anything in the highlights. Um, that really helped. That was great. Gave us a lot of detail to work with. Then the problem became though when we got into post, it was actually too bright.
Mm,
And I asked Sam to like take it way down and also to like crush the contrast, because for me, when you're like just barely able to see something, there's not a lot of contrast in it. So I was like, bring the highlights way, way, way down and bring the shadows all the way to black. And and then we also did some shaping, a lot of like controlling on set and controlling with power windows in the color grade, to make it feel even more darker. But
yeah.
we did have an interesting technical problem with this, or a thing that I hadn't realized was the case. And stop me if this is too bogged down in technical. But we're grading in a theater with a projector, and I kept looking at the shadows and being like, are you sure that that's as dark as the shadows can possibly be? Like, do we have a LUT on that's like bringing that shadow up or something in our general look or whatever? And Sam was like, no, like that is as dark as it can be. That is like absolute black on the scopes, whatever.
Mm,
And I like put my hand in front of the projection. I was like, but look, like I can cast a shadow that's black. Like if I make a shadow on the screen, that's darker. Can we just make it that dark? And he was like, well, you can't with a projection, because on a projection, you have it goes through the glass that's in front of the projector when it's in a projection room. And that glass then becomes a light source and actually fills
mm,
the room with a little bit of ambience in that case. So if we had been grading on an OLED or something, this wouldn't be an issue. And I know that for the digital version that was eventually made, that was all, corrected and brought down. And that scene was graded a little bit differently. But for the projection, it was like we kind of needed to bring some contrast into it to make the blacks feel black enough. Otherwise, it felt
yeah.
really washed out. So we kind of went back a little bit on that and brought the highlights up a touch, and that helped it feel like, okay, that's as dark as it possibly can be.
Yeah, no, that I find that stuff fascinating. And I was going to ask you if you work with the colorists after the fact, and how much time do you spend talking to them about, how, because they can really make or break some of your images. Like you can only go so far with great composition, acting, and camera movement, lighting. But when like the colorist comes in, like if they don't color it well, then it could really look bad. It sounds like you have a great relationship with your colorist, but that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Sam is awesome, and he does every film I can possibly get him on. So, and
That's
and for
awesome.
those listening at home, if you don't know what a LUT is, it's short for lookup table, which is essentially like a customizable Instagram filter. It's like a filter that you can apply to the image, change the colors broadly, but you can't adjust it at all. So what that does is when you're shooting, it gives you like a baseline look for everything, that can get applied to the dailies or the footage as it's being shot. And then later you can go and tweak everything. But you kind of need like a filter that you don't want to mess with while you're shooting.
So I'm curious, with your camera rig, how heavy was that thing?
Interesting question. It varied actually from setup to setup, and we used the Sony Venice, and the Venice has a mode called Rialto mode, where you can actually take the sensor block off of the camera body and keep the lens and the sensor block as one unit and cabled to the camera body. So we used that sparingly, but when we used it, it was really helpful to have a much smaller camera physically and for lower weight. I would guess that when the whole thing was built out, it's probably about 30 pounds. It's usual camera weight. We sometimes had it in, studio mode, sometimes had it in shoulder handheld mode. I love operating on my shoulder. And we did a little bit of gimbal and Steadicam work, and the builds were a little bit different for that. And then there's the moment where the camera goes through the window during the flashback, the car window. And that was a kind of specialty rig we made with a small gimbal, kind of Ronin RS2,
Hmm.
and we did the Rialto mode with a small lens on that, and we were able to kind of balance that and keep it tight to get it through the window. But then the camera body had to be attached, so the Vespa grip was able to wear a backpack with the camera body and kind of follow the operator who passed it off to me inside the car, and then sit on the trunk of the car as the car drove away. So
Gotcha. Dang, that's cool. Now with the phone light that you guys use in the tunnels, is that just a regular phone light, or is there some sort of attachment or different light that you attach to the phone?
yeah, so the when she's holding the cell phone for the light, that was just the phone light. We did realize that her character had a case on the phone, and when we were holding the phone with the light on it, with the case on it, the case obscured the light slightly, or just kind of blew it up a little bit, that it kind of flared more and didn't look great. So it's maybe a continuity issue, but it didn't really matter because you're looking at a very bright point, so you can't really see the case itself. But when we shot with just where you're seeing the light, we took the case off so that the light was clearer. And then when you see when she's holding it and we're behind her, the case is on so that it's still projecting out that way. And then in where there's also the moments of the flashlight, and the flashlight was a shell flashlight with an LED that we found and embedded inside of the flashlight, and could remotely control that. The brightness of it, we didn't really change the color of it remotely, but we did have a little bit of a gel to just kind of make it a better color, I guess.
Hmm.
And the remote control allowed us to adjust the brightness, but also flicker it for when it's like not working for Justin. The other kind of augmentation we did to the lighting in the tunnels was the gaffer. His name is Zeiss, by the way. He's great. Which is Zeiss is sort of a nickname for in Bulgaria for somebody who has glasses, and it's like sort of an endearing nickname. So he just goes by Zeiss all the time. He came up with this rig with like a little, maybe about this big, like an LED disc light, and then built a little snoot on it out of black wrap, I think. And then he had a little like top hat for that. And he would walk behind, like if I was shooting Georgina walking down the tunnel with a flashlight, we would help her figure out where to point the light to flare the lens at the right time or bounce off the wall at a certain time or something like that. But then Zeiss would be right behind me with his light matching the direction that she was pointing by bouncing it into the tunnel wall, and that added to the ambience, but from the right direction wherever she was pointing it. And then when she turned around quickly, there were a few moments where she turns away from the camera, he would quickly cap the light so that we wouldn't have any of that ambience coming from the front. And it was important as he was doing that I didn't see any of the direct light from his rig kind of raking down the walls, just that it was hitting the bounced area off camera. And then there was the boom operator in there too. So it was the three of us kind of in a very tight line, and Zeiss trying to get the light into position. And
As well as not cast your guys' shadows, you know?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Wow.
it's a lot of careful coordinating and his brilliant intuition to kind of make that work. We did do some testing of a variety of things. We had like one test day, and one of the things we tested was how much fog to do in the tunnels. And we discovered just a tiny bit was right, because otherwise it would blow it all up with the flashlight.
Hmm.
But also we were like, do we need to add any other supplemental light in the tunnels? We tried backlight, we tried lighting from like around the corner, we tried LED strips at different places as backlight, front light, things like that. And all of those felt really unnatural and weird to me, and looked lit, and we're like, where is this light coming from?
Hmm.
So stripping it down to just the flashlight helped. And the camera, shooting with the Venice, we could shoot at 2500 ISO. And I chose pretty fast lenses, the Zeiss Supreme Primes, which could open to a 1.5. So with that arsenal, it was like, oh yeah, we can get enough
Hmm.
exposure to the tunnels and make it work.
I was gonna say that I feel like it's hard enough when you're operating camera, you're on like a gimbal or something, and someone's behind you, making sure you're not gonna like fall off a curb or down the stairs. It's hard enough just with that because you're constantly walking into that, or it's kind of messing up your flow of your steps a little bit. But to have someone with a light, someone with the boom mic, and all that stuff in a limited space tunnel sounds very difficult.
Yeah, it was challenging. And I'm actually glad you mentioned that, because there was, I had a great experience with Petio, our best boy grip, who is just fantastically innovative and helpful. But he was the person kind of assigned to spotting me whenever I was operating handheld or anything. And typically I feel that way about that person. And I'm like, they're just in the way. I'd rather just do it myself. And like, this is kind of
Hmm.
messing up the operating or slowing me down. But Patio had some way of just like, always being in the right place at the right time and guiding me in such a way that didn't mess up the operating. And there were even moments where like once I kind of gained a trust for him, I could like let him almost operate me like a dolly. He could like drag me around and help me through some tight spaces or around a corner or something. And when I let that happen, and I knew that he had the shot in mind, we could really achieve something great. There's some cool moments on top of the silo where it's like I had to like kind of go up the curve and step off an apple box or something like that, and he was just like just like pushed me up the curve, and I was like, okay, whoa.
So in the tunnel scene, something that I wanted to compliment was the use of the wide angle lenses when AJ drops or when he loses his tape measure and he's got the light and then like the knife or whatever. Even though, he doesn't get like rushed up on at that point, that intensity just skyrockets when you feel like he's now wearing a GoPro or something. It's very
Yeah.
terrifying.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad that was effective. Yeah, that originally we were thinking about doing, and not at that exact moment, but at a later moment, thinking about doing a snorri cam rig. A snorri cam is where the camera is attached to the actor, and we had some ideas for it. Never really had enough time to develop the rig itself, but to that point, we were like, we wanted to really get in his POV at some point, and instead of the snorri cam for that shot in particular, I just put the camera on his shoulder and held it while he put his hands out.
Something that I noticed on my first watch through of Barbarian that I've been like dying to get confirmation on. Are there Eminem Easter eggs throughout the film? Because I feel like there's three things that I feel like are like Eminem the rapper, set in Detroit. Main character's last name is Marshall. And then the idea of this guy who originally owns this house and now living in the basement. He's got the tapes of the women that he's, abused and murdered. And one of them is Tanya. He's got Eminem has a skit in his Relapse album, which is all about murdering women. That's called Tanya. And I'm just like, and him being a psychopath and whatnot. But anyway, I looked at Zach Kreger's Instagram. He doesn't follow a ton of people, but he does follow Eminem. And I'm like, all right, I feel like these are Easter eggs. I don't know.
Wow, I really wish I could give you confirmation on this. I have no
God,
idea. This is the first I've heard of it, to be honest. And yeah, that sounds like it adds up to something intentional, but especially the Tanya thing. But yeah, I
Mhm.
didn't put any of that together.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Damn it.
Yeah,
That's
but
too
I'll ask
bad.
him. I'll ask him for you.
Yeah, I would love to just know whether or not I'm reading way too much into it.
There's actually a fun I don't know if it's an Easter egg or something that somebody else told me about that I still don't have confirmation on either. The font that is used for the Barbarian title
Hmm.
is the same as Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce.
Oh,
And
really?
I was like, it's Sweet Baby? Like, I don't know. It seems like it's got some kind of overlap intentionality, but who knows?
Yeah, it's funny when the movie first came out, I remember seeing a TikTok that was like they were trying to talk about why is it called Barbarian and someone had it like written on a whiteboard or something and they're like it spells Airbnb and it's close but there's like one or two extra letters or something like that.
Yeah.
Um and in classic TikTok culture, you don't really watch the full video and you just kind of are swiping. I was like, wow, that's cool. And then it wasn't until later I was like, that doesn't spell Airbnb. But yeah. And then on my second watch, because it kind of went over my head the first time that the street name is Barbary. And so I was like, oh, okay. Now I get
Yeah.
it. Like on top of the fact that this woman basically, or the guy, seem like they're super barbaric. But
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Another fun fact is the address is 476 Barbary Street, and I believe historically in the year 476, that's the year that the barbarians invaded Rome or something like that,
Mm.
Roman Empire. I don't know if that was intentional either. I think it was not. But
Happy
fun
accident.
coincidence. Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny because I was one. I always pay attention to those details, like, when I saw 476, and when I paused the film at the shocking scene, I was like, oh, is it going to be at like the 47 and 6 second mark? But it was at like 44, and I was like, damn it, I don't know what it means. So now that the film has been out for a couple years, what are you working on now? Or should we expect to see more theatrical releases with your DP talents?
Hopefully, yeah, I'm not quitting the biz. So yeah. Yeah, there's two films that I have coming out this year, I believe. One is called Don't Move. We also shot in Bulgaria. It's sort of an action thriller. And the other one is going between titles. I believe it's going to be released as Dating Game. Might be called The Woman of the Hour. But that was Anna Kendrick's directorial debut, and she's also in it. And it is a true crime thriller set in the 70s about a serial killer who makes an appearance on the Dating Game TV show. And Anna's character is a contestant on the show.
Gotcha. That's cool.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that one. I don't know exactly when or where we'll be seeing it, but yeah.
Well, cool. I'll definitely be keeping my eyes out for those because, love the work on Barbarian. And if you want to tell people where they can follow you, if you also have a website or anything like that you want to plug.
Sure. I'm just on Instagram at Zach Kuperstein, and my website is zachkuperstein.com.
Well, cool. Thank you so much for being here. This is really fun to pick your brain about, the method to your madness of making such a really cool idea come to life.
Absolutely. My pleasure. I'm so excited that the film affected you and that you enjoyed it so much. It's great.